To begin a podcast like that, I'm just realizing now that I am letting my words speak now rather than my actions.
You travelled 15,000 kilometres on the tracks. What were you doing on the trains?
Human connections are really easy to form and most people are very open to them. If someone doesn't want to speak to you, the issue might not only lie with you. I think I started to blame myself a lot less after doing that.
Just how others treat you is almost as much of a reflection on them as it is on you, you know?
Yeah. And so I wrote myself a letter in June 2020 when I was really at the peak of self-love, but in the way of, I'm not egotistical, like, oh, I'm so great at doing X, Y, Z. It was just like, no, I'm just happy that I can actually do these things. What I quite enjoy about running is that it's against yourself. You don't have to be competitive against other people.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year and welcome back to my podcast, Coffees on Me, David Quan, where I strive to give guests legacy-worthy interviews that listeners can enjoy while cooking, commuting, relaxing, or walking their pets. I hope that you and your family have had a wonderful start to 2023. Lots of people have started to come back to Cambridge and we're all very excited for the second term, which is Lent term. My guest and I are enjoying a flat white here after he had made his way from very, very far away. We have surpassed 5,000 and are approaching 10,000 podcast downloads. If you have been enjoying the discussions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, please do consider leaving a review and nominating a guest by contacting me via my Linktree, David Quan. A highlight, of course, has been seeing this podcast on people's Spotify Wraps for 2022. I cannot thank all the guests enough for their courage and insights. For those new to the podcast, welcome and thank you for your engagement. Please know that I don't take your time and feedback for granted, because when I started this podcast at a low point of my time at Cambridge, I was mostly nervous about humiliating myself. But I went ahead with this passion project based on 3 ideals which also make up the content description for each episode. First, a purpose of giving. Second, learning from others. And third, sharing of stories. I will happily be the first to recognise and admit my many inadequacies in how my communication, empathy, knowledge and other skills are still very much a work in progress. But I maintain this deep conviction that this passion project is wholly true to the founding motivations about giving, learning and sharing is a worthwhile pursuit. Indeed, it is the guests who deserve so much credit for their courage and insights. Today, I have the absolute honour of hosting Levente, who has helped me to capture many happy moments in Cambridge and also helped me with my first year sociology exams. Levente Koroes is a fresh grad out of Eddie's, St Edmund's College, Cambridge, where he read HSPS, Human, Social and Political Sciences. He's mainly interested in political economy as well as exploring new cultures. He is enthusiastic about train travel in Europe and letting your actions speak louder than words when it comes to the environment. He trains with the CU Triathlete Club and aspires to race in the Tri Varsity in the coming year. He has been taking photos of the events and people in Cambridge for the past 4 years and organised a May Ball in 2022. Levi, thank you so much for coming. Happy New Year and welcome to my podcast, Coffees on Me, David Quan.
Happy New Year to you, David, and congratulations on 5,000 downloads. And Happy New Year, everyone. I hope it's been a lovely festive period.
Thank you very much. Well, there's a lot that I don't know, but what I do know is that you didn't take a flight here. And you mentioned about your actions speaking louder than words. What does that mean? What actions have you, or inaction in this case, have you taken?
Well, it's actually really funny to begin a podcast like that. I'm just realising now that I am letting my words speak now rather than my actions. So I am someone who had a very fortuitous childhood insofar as, even though I come from a middle-class kind of Central Eastern European family, my mother used to be a tour guide, and so her philosophy was always giving experiences as presents rather than material objects. So we travelled a lot, her and I, growing up, and I flew quite a bit, and I've seen most continents before the age of 18, and I'm very happy to say that, and I consider myself very lucky with that. However, for the past 2 years now, just a bit over 2 years, I haven't stepped on a single airplane, and I'm quite proud of that. I think there's a lot of talk going on around climate change and what we can do to change that. And I understand that some people say that on a micro level, our individual decisions kind of fade away because bigger corporations or states are not doing enough to combat climate change. But I don't really agree with it. I think there's still a lot we can do in terms of personal decisions and how we live our lives that can affect this global trend. And so I'm doing my part by not flying if I don't have to, and if that takes a bit more time to travel, then all that's great, because that means I can stare out the window and think, or I can read a book, or I can sleep, and thankfully Europe has a wonderful, for the most part, rail infrastructure, and I've only traveled on trains and a couple of ferries, which are not very climate friendly, but otherwise mostly on trains since September 2020.
In the year 2021 alone, you travelled 15,000 kilometres on the tracks, which is, approximately spending like over a week of the year on the trains. What were you doing on the trains?
Honestly, mostly just reading quite a bit. Obviously, the Cambridge workload means that you have to, if you have some free time, there's always readings to catch up on, and I still have a folder on my desktop called long-term readings, which probably would have been helpful for my degree, but I'm getting through those now. And for the most part, I read, or I was staring out the window, processing photos. Sometimes I would turn to other people around me and have a conversation. You meet the most interesting and honestly riveting people when it comes to traveling on trains, and especially going to the dining car and having a conversation with people there, or honestly just realizing that human connections are really easy to form, and most people are very open to them. Actually, made it very, very possible for me to travel like that, and so some people might think that it was boring, or it was maybe a bit of a waste, but in my opinion, I think of those almost a week on trains as a source of joy. And there's some level of kind of developmental reasoning behind it. I've heard that it's better to sleep on night trains because it kind of replicates the way how you fell asleep when you were a little kid. I'm not sure about that. It's always, sometimes it's difficult to fall asleep on trains, but otherwise, there's a lot of things to do, and I always really, really enjoy just hopping on a train and even just listening to music and staring out the window, or listening to a podcast and kind of just thinking about life and thinking about, I'm cutting through this landscape, but all around me there are millions of lives being lived, and just thinking about a random person running by the train tracks, and thinking about what my day be up to, or what my day be thinking about. That I've always found that to be quite fun.
Why do you think the European Union designated 2021 to be like EU Year of the Rail?
That's a really good question. I don't think they always try to designate specific years to celebrate some aspects of European life that member states can agree on, and that are not political. Unfortunately, the EU Year of the Rail didn't really mean much other than a lot of fancy words coming out of the commissioner, Andrea Vollen, and this so-called Connecting Europe Express running around Europe, which was an irony in itself, because hop on it said, but you couldn't actually hop on unless you were an accredited member of the press, or you somehow gained privileged access. Funnily enough, I can't remember the exact numbers, but there were at least like 60 or 70 changes at borders, and in an ironic way, it really highlighted some of the pitfalls when it comes to international rail travel.
That's really interesting. And as I was doing my research, it's not an area that I was overly familiar with, to be honest, but the word that really caught my attention was interoperability.
Yep.
What does that mean, and where are we in terms of interoperability at 2023 now?
So what is difficult to understand is how the entire structure, especially company structures around trains and state authorities, actually is built up. So let's say you have a manufacturer like Alstom who manufactures a train for a certain company or a certain individual, but that train will then have to be certified in all the countries that company wants to run it in. So, for example, if you have SNCF, the French railway company, they will have to make sure that the train sets that are being manufactured are certified to run in France. This means being compatible with the overhead electric system, and or if it's a diesel locomotive, then you have to make sure that it meets certain security requirements. And when it comes to international rail travel, this certification becomes difficult because you have to make sure that all the passenger cars are certified to run on the different tracks, and there's not a difference in gauge. So in mainland Europe, outside of narrow gauge lines, which are very, very small in number, or in the Iberian Peninsula in Spain and Portugal, they have in some parts different gauges, but for the most part you don't have to change the distance at which the wheels are sitting from each other. I think it's still 1,435 millimeters, but that changes when you go to, for example, Russia, or when you go to, for example, not now obviously, but Belarus, because they use a wider gauge. And historically, this was used specifically created in a way to make sure that invading forces couldn't use the same tracks as they used to resupply the forces up to the border of Russia. Now, if you wanted to run, let's say, yes, you have passenger cars, which are somewhat easier to certify, and then you have to have locomotives to actually pull those. Now, locomotives convert, obviously, electricity and make the train move, but different countries have different electric systems. So getting a locomotive certified for different countries is very difficult, and you have to build it in a way that so it meets the required service that you want to run it on. So, for example, the Austrians build the so-called Vectron locomotives that can run on the Hungarian, the Austrian, the German, the Czech systems. Some can run on the Dutch and the Belgian systems, and making sure that there's enough locos and there's enough rolling stock for international services is quite difficult, and there's not too much conversation going on in between the train operators to make sure that that this is actually being done. So it is very often the case that you will have a state-owned company like the Austrians ÖBB, who will run international services, but they are limited in where they can run services because of their rolling stock only being certified for a certain country or a certain group of countries. To add to this, you have the complication of coming to the UK. So there's a reason why Eurostar has a monopoly over trains in the Channel Tunnel. The reason for that is because when the French were building, when the Eurotunnel was being built, the French said, okay, well, any train that runs in this tunnel has to be at least 250 meters long, and it has to operate in a way that if there's a fire in the middle of the train, then both ends of the train can individually run back to either the UK or Europe, and passengers can be evacuated. And this is a very, very, very strong limiting factor. Now, to add to this, the French also wrote the security regulations in a way that basically only 2 train sets can meet the requirements that they had that were set for the Eurotunnel. Unsurprisingly, these two train sets are the ones manufactured by French company Alstom. Sorry, not no, Alstom manufactures, which is not French owned, but the train sets were owned by SNCF. So they effectively create this quasi-national monopoly, and these regulations, while keeping people safe, also limits the amount of operators that can run services to London. So that's why you don't have trains running from Germany to London, for example, or from Spain to London. You can only hop on a Eurostar from Paris, Brussels, Lille, Rotterdam, or Amsterdam. Another issue when it comes to the Eurostar is that you have to make sure that anyone who goes on a train that crosses the Channel Tunnel you have to have basically airport-style security searches at the stations before boarding the train, which slows down the boarding process. It's not like you can just hop on like any other train anywhere else in Europe. The Eurostar is a very special case where you have to go through security. There's only one, Spain does this for some of their long-distance high-speed trains, but the reason why the Germans couldn't run, for example, a Cologne or a Berlin to London service is because they didn't want to build up all the passport control, especially post-Brexit services, and the security required for such services, because these are not your normal trains. To just finalize this, interoperability also means that there's a set of rules that train staff have to meet. So, for example, if you have a sleeper train that goes from Paris to Portbou on the French-Spanish border, that train cannot cross the border because the requirements say that the loco drivers, the drivers of the locomotives, have to speak the local language on at least a B1 level. Now that means that if the French train driver doesn't speak Spanish, then the train is not allowed to cross into Spain. So that's why that train stops on the border, and the traveller then has to get off the train, hop on a local train to cross the border, and then they can continue travelling, even though there is absolutely no reason why that train couldn't run to Spain, and then why that individual traveller couldn't just travel onwards to Madrid or Barcelona, etc. Very small regulatory changes could make a massive difference when it comes to international cross-border rail, and I would very highly recommend checking out, if you're more interested in this, the blog of John Worth. So that's John, WORTH.EU, because he has written extensively and he has done an incredible amount of work when it comes to international cross-border rail. And I've met him a couple of times in the recent months, and he's a very, very knowledgeable person. He's from the other place, David. But he's a graduate of PP from Merton from 1998. Went to the same year as the current Prime Minister of the UK, and now teaches at the College of Europe. Fascinating person and a railway activist. And he had if you want to listen to some of the main tenets of interoperability and limiting factors, there was an episode of Rail Natters with John Worth just this week that perfectly encapsulated what the main issues are around international cross-border rail.
The other helpful website is the website of Mark Smith, and also Levi's very own blog, where he compares his own experiences of different operators that offer different levels of service through across the dimensions like ticketing, costs, and the live experience on the train.
Yep.
So I want to hone in on, I understand that when you're, on the train, you get that peace to kind of do whatever you want, and you can have these fascinating conversations. But building on what you said about operability, it is a tough word. You mentioned in your blog that rail advocates preach that, but the truth is that national operators protect their turf as much as they possibly can, and only really start taking customer feedback into account when competitors appear in the market. So what kind of challenges did you have in that year of not flying but being on the train, and how did you then go about resolving those challenges if the customer service are not available?
I didn't have too many challenges that I need to face, if I'm being honest, simply because Mark Smith's website, Seat 61, is a great time waster. If you ever need to procrastinate, he has a really good rundowns on, how to get from London to Sydney, for example, without ever hopping on a flight. Because you can do that.
London to Sydney.
London to Sydney. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not via train though. But
Yeah.
via train.
Well, you can take London to Paris Eurostar. You used to be able to take Paris to Moscow on the Russian sleeper train. Then you could take Moscow to Beijing on the Trans-Mongolian. Then you could go down from Beijing down south all the way to Bangkok, then in Thailand, and then Bangkok to Kuala Lumpur to Singapore. Some of these will involve some coaches, but other than that, once you get to Singapore, then the trick is to go to the harbour and ask if any of the cargo ships have any free cabins. And if they do, then you hop on the cargo ship and you sail to Australia, and then you arrive and go through immigration like everyone else, and then you take the train from Perth to Sydney. Well, so Perth, Melbourne, Sydney. I haven't taken that many trains in Australia, to be honest, but yeah, that's the rough rundown. Back in Europe, I didn't face that many challenges. What I meant by that statement a little bit more was simply that international services take up so little of what national operators care about, that everyone kind of says, well, it's not my fault that it's not good here, or there's not really a cohesive forum or like a cohesive force on the European level to encourage cross-border trains and cross-border rail, and some of the protectionist policies, such as the ones, in France, are very prohibitive. So, for example, if you wanted to run an international service that was a very long yawn, from Vienna to Paris, and you wanted that train to stop at a station in Germany, that would cost you 10 euros, maybe 20 euros, as in if you're operating the train. Same in Austria, but once you get to France, the French railway company might charge you upwards of 900 euros just to serve your train at a given station. And so the French are particularly terrible at this, and a great example of how competition can actually encourage a better service is the Paris to Milan service. So, for example, the French used to run this service, I think, 3 or 4 times a day, and at terribly expensive prices, and it was obviously underutilized because of those prices. And then the Italian operator said, okay, well, we think there's a bit more demand than it seems. We're going to run our fast trains at the same speeds as the French from Milan via Lyon to Paris at cheaper prices. And suddenly demand shot up because there were cheaper options available, and that then prompted the French state company, after ignoring customer feedback for years, to increase its services and to make them better between Paris and Milan. And so that's one example where competition can definitely create better conditions for the traveler.
You've identified issues such as climate change and convenience and public policy, and obviously alluded to the different actors and stakeholders like private companies, EU. Now that you've done a degree at Cambridge, HSPS, and I know that you've at least taken sociology, have your views upon the solutions to some of the problems you've addressed evolve?
To international rail travel, or?
Yeah, or just addressing, climate change and, foregoing, flight shame or whatever in that area.
That's an interesting question. I think my Cambridge degree and the things I read gave me a better analytical toolkit to identify those main stakeholders you mentioned and the main reasons why some of these issues cannot be resolved. At the same time, I think my degree, I looked at, and I studied very different things as part of my degree than my hobby project, which is encouraging people to take trains rather than flying. I think understanding the framework and the theoretical basis of international politics is it can be applied to real world issues, and I can see how the European Union fails to do or doesn't have the power to do enough compared to, for example, compared to member states. And I can see why where that deficiency comes from, and why that deficiency exists, and why states behave the way they do. However, at this point, it's difficult to distinguish what Cambridge had given me in this regard, and in this regard of understanding the world, and to separate that from what I knew previously. It kind of, I think knowledge evolves in a way that the two things kind of, the pre-existing knowledge and what I learned at Cambridge kind of intertwine to my understanding of these issues now.
Obviously, it's your passion project or interest to encourage people to forego flying. Are there any memorable conversations that you've had with friends or family, and what kind of resistances have you received, and have you had any successful, say, conversions of people who have adopted your lifestyle and viewpoints?
Don't get me wrong. I won't say I'm non-aggressive about it, because if you're preaching fighting against climate change on your Instagram, and then you're taking €20 flights to Tenerife in between terms to relax on the beach, I think there's a bit of hypocrisy in that. I think I've had conversations with my friends and family, but the main issue always boils down to price, and the problem is that in the European Union, kerosene or jet fuel is not taxed, which is ludicrous, because we've got the Sustainable Development Goals, we've got net zero by 2050, we've got all these wonderful goals and wonderful slogans, but at the same time, these very strong lobbyists for budget airlines in Brussels make sure that jet fuel stays non-taxed, and while at the same time international rail travel remains pretty expensive. Now, we're at a point where let's say if you compare a mid-tier airline like British Airways or Air France or KLM, and if you compare the equivalent on rail, so let's take the classic London to Amsterdam route, the Eurostar can be around the same cost, and you can get to Amsterdam sometimes quicker than by flying. But once you start taking into account things, but once you start flying without a massive suitcase, or if you fly a budget airline, it's going to be cheaper and it's going to be quicker. I think there should be a trade-off between the time it takes to travel to a certain place, and how expensive it is. So I don't see why trains should cost more than flying. I think flying should return to what it was in the 60s, which was a privilege for those who could afford it, because cheap flights to popular destinations, tourist destinations, is creating then indirect ripple effects, such as the proliferation of Airbnb, increased gentrification, heightened inequality in cities, which is then driving the locals out and turning a lot of European city centres, even though they retain some of their historic architecture or some of their historical flavour, so some of the offerings, such as your fast food restaurants and your tourist shops and this and that, are starting to converge, and that's not really. I don't think that's really nice to see, and I don't think that people should be driven out of their homes because someone is coming in to buy it and turning it into an Airbnb. So I think Barcelona fought back against Airbnb really well. So did Amsterdam to some extent, and I was very happy to see that, because Airbnb is very very disruptive to local housing markets, for example. So you can see how the ecosystem and how very simple variables such as taxing flight tickets or taxing kerosene could lead to a more sustainable life for us all.
Let's pull it back to the young man in the spring when he got accepted into Milestone Institute, a talent development program for secondary students. What was that young man envisioning himself doing with all his talents?
Oh, I had no idea. I genuinely had no idea. I went to Milestone because of a very good friend of mine who recommended it, and because at the time I didn't really have too many plans for what I wanted to do after secondary school. All I knew that mine was the second to last year of European students who would still be eligible for the British student loan that home fee or home status people get. So people from the UK can take out a student loan that has very favourable terms, and I obviously had to pay the same tuition that they did, which is capped at £9,250 a year. Whereas now, if you wanted to apply to the UK from Europe, then you would have to pay overseas fees, which is, I imagine, quite a nightmare.
Let's not talk about that.
It's tough. And that's why that's why it's difficult to do a master's now. So I knew that I wanted to try and apply to the UK, and obviously places like Cambridge and Oxford, I thought I would give it a try, but I didn't. It seemed like a pipe dream. It honestly seemed like, yeah, people get into Cambridge who were born to go to Cambridge and have this, like, I don't know, child prodigy level of talent. And so I went to Milestone because they could help me with the preparation process for applying to go to university in the UK. Now, to actually do that, I also had to take extra classes. So I studied political theory and sociology, and I had a module on understanding terrorism, which was fascinating at Milestone. And I met some of my closest friends to this day there. I always had a difficulty trying to find like-minded people in Hungary, and so being in Milestone, being surrounded by wonderfully intelligent people who had a more global and a more kind of holistic vision of the world, a less Eurocentric vision of the world, is what I wanted for myself. And so I didn't know what talents I had. I didn't know what I wanted to do with them. All I wanted to do was study and give it all a shot and put my work ethic into it and see where it would take me.
Was it quite an academic environment then?
Yeah. So Milestone, it tries to emulate a university environment insofar as it has a lot of individual learning, particularly for social sciences, but then it has a mentoring program as well. So I was assisted by a wonderful person called Christoph, who I think of very, 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 very fondly. And I mean, I've just had really, really wonderful conversations, even in kind of the theoretical realm of what does it mean to be part of a nation? What is a nation? Things like these, that conversations that came up again during university, but that were helpful to think about before applying, because once you start thinking about these concepts, they kind of start sprouting in your brain, and then they become a lot more developed by the time you get to your Cambridge interview, for example. And so it was quite academic, but for me, I mean, I just spent hours and hours and hours in the library for an entire summer, and I loved doing that.
Wow, that's so cool. You're obviously quite an introspective person and also quite driven for personal development, and it often comes to the point of like curiosity and exposure and just exposing yourself to diverse things and new perspectives. In your blog about turning 20, you mentioned that from the point of turning 18, you decided to explore yourself a bit more. You started writing to get yourself out of the deep hole that you had dug for yourself into, which helped you clear your brain and focus on your thoughts more. A deep hole. What hole did you dig yourself into?
I mean, this was tough. So, if can we go back a little bit more? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, let's go back 4 years. And I'm not going to talk through 4 years, but I want to mention that I was in Australia when I was 14, and I returned to Hungary after spending 11 months studying in Cairns and working, and I was in my first ever relationship, and I had been by then a year and a half into my first ever relationship, and I thought, oh my God, this will be the person that I marry someday, and that ended a year and a half after that. So that ended in April 2016 when I was in kind of year 10, and I thought, well, okay, I now have to replan my entire life, and that meant that I started hanging out with different people, and I found myself in some social situations where I wasn't really comfortable in, and I found myself in some groups that did not have a really good effect on me, and I think I tried to acquire some of their personality traits to try and fit in a bit more, and I think that was kind of pushing against who I really wanted to be, or who I really wanted to become, and that created this tension within me, and so I wasn't really doing particularly well. I simultaneously, at around the age of 17, I've always been someone who has held a job. I've held a job since the age of 14, and so at the time I was working in are we allowed to say brands on this show? Okay, I was working in McDonald's, and working in McDonald's about 10 to 15 hours per week, while also doing secondary school and trying to remain healthy, and failing at it, and working weekends. That was just not working. And so by the end of 2016, I was really, really burnt out, and I got a much better job starting in 2017. But that was kind of the arc of not really doing particularly well and trying to figure out, okay, why can't I, for example, enjoy things and be present in the moment? And that took a much longer time than I thought to actually figure out. And yeah, that took most of actually first year of university as well to overcome.
Were you working out of necessity, or because it was just you felt like it would be good for you?
To some extent, I was working for necessity because, well, not really necessity. No, I could have done without working. It's just that my parents had a restrictive philosophy about supporting my social endeavors, I suppose, and so I wasn't given too much money to go out and things like that, and my father, for example, didn't really see the point of partying. My mother thought I was at house parties at all times, and it was a complete misconception of what young life was like at the time, or how much it cost. So I had to take on a job to actually support going out and spending money on things, and so that's why I did it. Also as well, I started working at McDonald's at the age of 17 in the summer, because I think your summer at 17 just sucks a little bit, simply because all the fun things you want to do, you have to get a fake ID for, and I'm not really one to dabble with fake IDs, and
at least you won't admit it here.
And so I wanted to work rather than sit around and play video games at home, so that's why I did it. Yeah, but that working environment was not particularly positive, and I left after a harassment case. But yeah.
So when you were in Australia for the couple of years, I would imagine it's quite different to the culture at Hungary, and why did your family move to Australia for those 2 years only?
It was only 1 year. It was from actually, I remember the day we arrived. It was the 27th of June 2013, and we left on the 31st of May 2014.
Should have visited me in Adelaide at the point.
I should have. That would have been great. If only. Actually, we might have seen each other. Actually, it would have been funny. But anyway, like I said, my mother has a very different philosophy to, I think, most parents, and so she wanted to show me a different lifestyle and a different culture and different social context and cultural context to live in. I was not doing particularly well at the end of primary school, despite being in my first ever relationship, I was heavily bullied and
in primary school.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was just not really feeling good in like where I was with in life. And yeah, she wanted to show me a different educational system and a different cultural context to live in, and so the first choice was the US, but because of some administrative reasons that are too boring to go into after speaking so much about train interoperability, the irony is not lost on me. Australia was the second choice, and oh my god, it was an absolutely life-changing experience. I loved it, even though I was mad in love, 14-year-old boy, mad in love, head over heels.
So she was in Australia. You met her in Australia.
No, she was in Hungary, so we were doing long distance over like with the time zone difference, which I'm pretty sure that you're very conscious of, and calls every now and again, a lot of messaging back and forth. At the same time, I had to go to school there, so I made friends and yeah, the first 2 weeks were absolutely horror. Like it was a nightmare. The first 2 weeks were very, very difficult because I had to face the fact that Australian internet was a lot worse than what I was used to in Europe, and also I was just sad because it was very unusual. I didn't really take it as an adventure. I think if I did the same thing today, I would take it a lot more like an adventure. At the time, I was trying to hold on to things that I was comfortable with, but I was in a totally new place, only speaking English, where I was okay. I think my English was okay, an intermediate level, but not entirely comfortable with living and speaking English, constantly. And yeah, then school started in July, and wearing uniforms and cycling to school, and suddenly realizing that, oh my god, that school can actually be a lot more fun if you just let people think and actually encourage people to think rather than relying on memorizing. And the Hungarian education system is very, very different to the Australian one. The Australian one actually encourages you to be a lot more autonomous and a lot more
it's not a lot of pressure in Australia. There's a lot of focus on play, just have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Very laid back. Even though I wanted to do pretty well, and I remember being able to pick my subjects. I couldn't believe it. Like I could, if I wanted to, I could have learned Japanese. I could have applied for like a graphic design course, and I ended up being put in, despite my wishes, I was put in the kind of advanced maths and science enrichment class, and that turned out to be really, really fun. I had a really, really good teacher, Peter Cox. I don't think he's listening to this, but
you can send it to him.
To this day, I might send it to him. I did reach out to him in my second year of uni, actually, because I did a bit of stats back in Australia, and then I did stats again in at Cambridge.
Soc
and
Soc 5.
Paul 6.
Paul 6. Okay.
But the same things came back, and I emailed him saying, "Oh my god, thank you so much for teaching me what a regression coefficient is, or correlation coefficient is, because now it's a lot easier to understand." And yeah, they would. It was a whole lot more laid back. My teachers were younger, which meant that there was just so much more freedom to discuss things and to explore things. Absolutely, it was. Every single moment of it, I really, really enjoyed, and I treasured the memory of going to school in Cairns a lot. There are some friends that I still speak to from Australia, very few, but I still follow them and I still follow their lives, and it makes me very happy. I have this one friend, for example, Joe Benzie, who's a triathlete, much better than myself, and he's also an officer for the Australian Navy, and he's so inspirational, and we chat every now and again, and I remember him being just full of life and always happy. And that difference in people generally being positive and being laid back and being open to new friendships is the complete opposite to what you experience in Hungary. And for me, that was extremely eye-opening, and that only reaffirmed my conviction that I had since the age of 8. I think that I'd never want to live in Hungary again. No. And I'm very happy to say that I don't. Yeah.
Your mother obviously sounds like a very extraordinary woman, especially with her philosophies of exposure. What I find quite fascinating actually is it sounds like when you were leaving Hungary, there were two extreme kind of emotions you were feeling. On the one hand, dealing with the bullying and feeling like perhaps you were out of place and didn't really have your identity and, were struggling in that regard. But also, on the other hand, being madly in love and experiencing perhaps the pinnacles of your emotions. So as you were departing Hungary, you were essentially, at least temporarily, putting aside both of them. What was the balance or weighing up between leaving the good and the bad? If that makes sense.
I was excited to leave Europe as a whole, because I had never been to Australia before, and I haven't returned since, and I really want to. And every single time I meet someone from Oz, it makes me really, really happy, and it's always nice to obviously chat to them. But
so Australia was almost like a reset and like a springboard into your adulthood.
It was, but I didn't recognize it at the time that it could be that. I think I was still really focused on video games and my girlfriend at the time, and just being on Twitter and spending time on social media was took up a major part of my life even back then. Thankfully, it's one of my resolutions to cut that down. So I've deleted Instagram and Twitter off my phone. Great decisions so far. And I think once I started to realize the potential and how much more there was to explore in Australia, I started to enjoy it so much more, and it became easier to balance. Even the long distance relationship bit, I said I would just put in effort to make sure that I stayed together with her, but also I wanted to explore what there was to offer in what there was to experience in Cairns. I think Cairns was not the best choice because it also meant moving from Budapest, a city of 2 million, to Cairns, a city of, if we're really optimistic, 200,000 people, and 125,000 of those is usually tourists and visiting the Great Barrier Reef. And I also realized very early on that there wouldn't be anywhere for me to learn how to surf because it's the only city in Australia where you actually can't go out to surf. And one of the things I wanted to learn was how to surf in Australia. Still can't, but maybe one day. And it's there was a lot of change, but overall I think that had a very positive effect on my life. Yeah.
That's fascinating. You have focused a lot on your lifestyle over the years, as I've realised, and something I guess that builds on what you just said about people is after you had your strict diet, after you were exercising, you wrote that it's not only you that changes, but also how the world perceives you. So after you'd adopted your diet and exercising and having that exposure in Australia, because you had a chance to basically form your new identity, right?
Yeah.
Your past in Hungary, none of that.
Yeah.
The people in Cairns know. What kind of who were you, who did you think others think you were at the time?
Oh, that's hard to it was almost 10 years ago. That's hard to that's difficult to respond to. I think it's difficult to kind of just set the timeline of events, right? So I used to be quite overweight throughout most of primary school, and
was that one of the causes of bullying?
Yeah. That and my Jewish background, and so once I lost once I had my first kind of wave of losing most of my weight, I just noticed that people were a lot more receptive to talking to me, and were a lot more keen on like even just giving me a smile or making eye contact. But that actually changed a lot more in 2016 when I lost the kind of the remainder of what there was to lose. And yeah, that was a massive change. Like that, I was having conversations with, I mean, I'm not going to surprise anyone if I say, after speaking to, I think, someone who's particularly attractive when you are not, can be sometimes intimidating, but actually dressing that, like overcoming that, and realizing that actually tells you in a way that you're normal, and that you do fit into society, and the issue isn't, if someone doesn't want to speak to you, the issue might not only lie with you. I think I started to blame myself a lot less after doing that.
Just how others treat you is almost as much of a reflection on them as it is on you, you know. Yeah, that's fascinating, and I appreciate you being so vulnerable and encouraging.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite powerful because, I mean, we've obviously never, you've never shared that part of me, and all I really see is this very successful triathlete who has his own photography business, smiling at running events, social events, and very popular, highly accomplished, and at Varsity as well for the ski trip. I remember, you were saying how much you skied and how good you were at it, and I was like, oh, damn, this guy has got it all figured out.
Very far away from that.
But I think that's also one of the reasons why I like these kind of in-depth episode of podcasts, for us to really just see our own humanity, and we have all been through the struggles, and obviously there's a scale and magnitude to it, but it doesn't undermine any of our own kind of difficulties that we've gone through and the perceptions that we've had of ourselves and other people's on us. So it's very, very powerful, and I just want to thank you for sharing that. And it leads on well to this idea of the 180 that you wrote about, and you used to despise running and Macklemore as well, and hip-hop as a genre.
You went very far back on my Twitter. I see how it is. You did do your research. Oh.
And of the 50 most played songs in your library, 29 of them are hip-hop tracks. So, and before 2016 you refused to listen to hip-hop tracks, but since then you mentioned that you started running and exercising, and you're running 10Ks on a regular basis, and you said you couldn't get off the dopamine even if you wanted to. So was there obviously running, exercising, it feels good, it feels like you're progressing, and as you were mentioning with the weight loss, etc. But was there a competitive element? That was there other peers who you were like, oh, I want to be like him, or someone who's a few years older where you just went, wow, I want to be like him or her?
I think to some extent, seeing, like I said, Joe Benzie from Oz was quite inspirational in this. But I just think of running as this, as this activity that people who want to clear their minds and just live a kind of a conscientious life do. And when I first got into running, I didn't really get it. And then I think what I quite enjoy about running is that it's against yourself. It's you don't have to be competitive against other people, because if you do become competitive about running, it very quickly can spiral into a level of laziness, or if I'm not beating my personal record, then what's the point? Or if I'm not doing better than this other person, then what's the point? Whereas for me it was, well, okay, last week I ran X amount of kilometers. Can I do more than that? How far can I push myself? How does that feel? And but that like I said, that can actually lead to, funnily enough, inaction, because if you're not kind of pushing yourself, if you're constantly pushing yourself, you're going to burn out eventually. And so this year I'm trying to take it a bit more chill. I had I spent some lovely time with Ed Cater, who's the president of the Tri Club, and he said he doesn't run for the numbers. He doesn't run for the pace or, increasing the mileage. It's just for the fun of it. And I think doing things just for the fun of it was very difficult for me for the longest time. I just wanted to be, the best I could possibly be at everything. But I realized, especially during uni, that was not possible. There was always someone better than me, and that would be disappointing after a while, because you can push yourself very, very hard, but if there's someone else with more talent or with a better work ethic, then it's difficult to overcome that. So it's a careful balance of improving, because you're going to improve regardless of what philosophy you employ, if you just go out and do it. But also, for me, I'm trying different things, and so this year I'm just doing self-improvement things because I know they work. I had this particularly nice time over the first lockdown in 2020, where I kind of said, okay, well, I don't have any real exams. I have Cambridge all for myself. It was completely empty. I think Cambridge over 2020 and 2021 was a very, very different place to what it is, or what it was before, what it is today. And I spent a lot of time just kind of figuring these things out. And I felt really, really happy because of the things that I started doing and the routines I formed. And so I wrote myself a letter in June 2020, when I was really at the peak of self-love, but in the way of, I'm not egotistical, like, oh, I'm so great at doing X, Y, Z. It was just like, no, I'm just happy that I can actually do these things, and just the happiness of, this joie d'être. It's the being, the happiness of just being, the joy of being. And I wrote myself this letter of, hey, if you ever get perpetually lazy and sad and disincentivized again, then here's the couple things you should do. And this winter, once again, as most winters, I found myself lazy and disincentivized and disinterested in most things again. And my diet for most of December was bad. My sleep was bad, etc. And now that I started sorting those things out again, I'm discovering, oh yeah, life is great again. It's just you've got to put some of the work in.
I know on your website you wrote that your passion is photographing people and capturing raw emotions, and I feel like now that having heard a bit more about your background, the capturing raw emotions really hits a little differently. Yeah. So your time in Cambridge, you've done quite a lot. You've helped a lot of people get great memories, such as for me, like my current Instagram profile picture, for example. Anything else about your time at Cambridge that you really want to feature in this recording?
Oh, I thought we were speaking. I thought we were talking a lot more about my time at Cambridge, but yeah, I think I want to delve into a bit more into photography, and I'm just mindful of the time.
We can keep going. So photography.
Yeah.
When did you start, and what about it really makes it your passion?
I didn't realize it was my passion. I didn't take photos of people before coming to university. I asked my dad's partner before coming to Cambridge if I could take her camera to Cambridge with me, because I did a bit of traveling even then by train. And then I got to Cambridge, and I remember going down to the combination room, CR of Eddie's on one of my, I think on the first night, and yeah, I just started kind of taking photos of people. I was just kind of standing around, and if I had my camera in my hands, and I noticed that people would come up to me and say, hey, could you take a photo of us? And then more people started arriving, and obviously Freshers Week began, and I just kind of kept doing that because I enjoyed the fact that I could do something while other people would be drinking or playing pool or socializing. For me, that was drinking a little bit, socializing a bit, but also walking around and taking like candid photos of people smiling and laughing and having a conversation. And then the next morning waking up and going through those photos and then posting them on the Eddie's Facebook group, and people would say, oh, these are really, really nice, can I put them on my social media? And I was like, oh my god, this is making people happy, I'm making friends out of it. And yeah, I was just enjoying it, and I just kept doing that. And then sometime in the middle of October 2019, someone messaged me saying, hey, so we're running the first BOP in Eddie's this term, do you want to come and take photos? It's like club photography, we'll pay you for it. And yeah, I'm like, what, you want me to you want me to go to a party, take photos of people I love, get drunk, and do the thing that
and do the
thing I enjoy, and still get paid? Like, that sounds great. Yeah, count me in. And so that was the first time I kind of realized, oh my god, there could be a bit more to this than just doing it as like something that I do as a hobby.
With that realization, then, did you then work on your skills, and if so, how do you become a better photographer?
I just kind of Googled, like, I asked one of my friends to lend me his Flygskam from the 80s, actually, because he still shoots film. And so I had this like Soviet era flash that wouldn't tilt, so it was a direct flash. So every single time every single time I would take a photo, the people being photographed would literally go like blind for half a second because it was so strong. I remember this because where we're recording this is very close to where I did another event that is very close to my heart, the a Modlin MCR BOP, and just the basics of flash photography and understanding how light bounces off walls. These things somewhat came to me instinctively. I did a bit of, I guess I watched or like listened to some YouTube videos about photography, but I didn't really read any books or anything like that. I just went out and practiced. I went out on photo walks. I took photos of Cambridge. I didn't really take photos of people outside on the streets because that was a bit too invasive for my liking. Nowadays that would be a little different. I take the photo and then I ask for permission. If that person likes the photo, then obviously that gets sent to them. It's a different process now. But yeah, that's how it began. And then I did my first BOP, and that was successful. And then I did the Gates Gala in 2019 of Gates Scholars, and it was very, very luxurious and quite extraordinary. And yeah, from then on in Lent of first year, I continued doing that. I did the Modlin MCR BOP, and then lockdown came, and I couldn't really take photos of people. I had to resort to kind of nature and trying to capture what lockdown was like in Cambridge. And I have so many photos. At one point in time, I do want to do like an exhibition or like a collection of photos of this is what Cambridge was like in lockdown. And then since then I've done Varsity twice. I've done 3 or 4 Mayballs. I'm hoping to do more. If you're on a Mayball committee and you haven't found a photographer yet, reach out. And it's been an incredible journey since then. It's meant that I got to meet a lot of very, very cool and really, really, really nice people, including yourself, David. Thank you. So it's just something I enjoy doing, and if it means that I can make some money out of it, I'll do that. But it's never the case that I'm.
So is it all paid now when you go to events, or do you also volunteer?
Sometimes I volunteer when the requests are reasonable and the event or the person that I'm photographing is interesting. So for example, I still take photos at the union because the union provides the opportunities for us photographers there to grow our portfolio with people who have a kind of a name for themselves, while also but it's unpaid. But then if the copyright were taken away from me and I couldn't use that photo wherever I wanted, I would stop taking photos of the union. Another case was the Cambridge Climate Stability Forum in 2022, where someone reached out from the committee asking if I wanted to take photos, and I said, in principle, yes. But then I asked for details, and they said, well, it's not that much. It's just you would have to be there for both days, and take photos of all the speakers and and then some candles of the people just having a conversation and of the environment. That would be really nice. And I said, sure, then that will be, here are my rates. You can certainly hire me. And I said, and then they said, no, it's unpaid. And I said, so you want me to do like 16 hours of work for free? And they said, no, you can join the lectures. And I don't want to blast CCSF too much here because I think that it's an important event, but that whole thing got really messy, and I was really unhappy with the way that was organized, and particularly the entitlement to, oh, well, you take photos for free at the union, why don't you come and take photos for us at CCSF? And I said, I don't have to give you a reason for that, first things first. And also just, your speakers are not that convincing, and your themes are, I don't think, particularly helpful when it comes to solving climate change, but again, a lot of empty talk.
So when you see other photographers' photos now, do you now go through in a lens of like comparing and critiquing and trying to learn from them? Because I mean, when I look at photos, it's like, oh, that's pretty, and that's it. But you as a photographer, would you then be imagining, oh, I would have switched up the angle there, or I would have changed the lighting there? Or...
Sometimes. I do take a bit of joy in Schadenfreude from time to time, and this is not a very nice thing to say, but there was one example where the union decided to hire someone else for for the Freshers' Ball, I think not this year, but the previous year, and then they published the photos, and it turned out that someone was just, I don't know who, but someone was just taking photos with the integrated Flygskam of a camera, which is not a good idea. And they were, and particularly as a photographer, and you have a decision to make. If you have to make sure that the photo that you're deciding to upload to the internet is good of that person. You can't take, because if I go out to an event, let's say I'm taking photos for 5 hours, I'm going to take 2,000 photos at the very least, but out of those, only about 200 or so make it to the internet. And I always tell people, it's not in my interest to publish bad photos of you. But some photographers don't recognize the importance of selecting the right ones, or picking and choosing. And so sometimes I do say things like, or I think about, oh, that photo could have been done differently, or maybe that angle is not the most flattering of that person. But at the same time, I learn from them, and I very actively look at different styles and ways of composing photos that will then lead to different results. And there's one photographer, or there's a couple of photographers in Cambridge in particular, who I really, really love working with, and whose work I find absolutely superb and very inspirational. Norden in St. John's, an absolutely incredible person, and a really, 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 really good photographer with an incredible eye. Norden Katic, yeah. And I think it's Katic, I think that's how he pronounces it. Yeah. And Jimmy Jackson in obviously
Jimmy's a legend.
Yeah, who did Varsity, and there was a photographer in Cambridge called Sarah Bluemel who told me Sarah was great. She did a lot of very creative things with light and colors that I then replicated in my own photos, and I loved working with her and getting inspiration from her. I think we, us photographers, we always look at each other's work to get some inspiration. And if you think that your photos are the best already, then I think that's a very close-minded way of thinking about it. There's also a really good social media network that I still am using called Glass, which is specifically only for professional photographers. And there's a person there called Sam Hurd, Hurd, who does wedding photography, but his wedding photography is outstanding. It is, I mean, it's leaps and bounds beyond anything that I could imagine to do. But his work and his way of composing things is just incredible, extraordinary, and I really love looking at it, because even though I might not be able to replicate it yet, it, once again, same with thinking about nations and political concepts, once that idea is in your brain, it starts sprouting, and I might replicate that in the future again.
That's awesome, and I feel very grateful that all the people who you've mentioned have also taken some really nice memories for me as well at Cambridge. In addition to, I don't know if you know Chris Boland, and also Dick NG, another really good.
I haven't had the latter I haven't met, but I love working with other photographers, just because of we get to nerd out on what's good and what isn't, and it's always great fun.
Anything else about your time at Cambridge that you want to be included?
Like I think I mentioned the COVID bit. Organising a Mayball. I'm going to quickly touch on it because I do want to, but I can't go into too much detail about some of the things. But organising a Mayball in your third year while you decide to write a dissertation and also live the social life of a second year, and you want to still do well and be healthy and have a good kind of exercise routine and sleep enough, that will not work. That one of the it will end up in we will try to maximize everything, and it will you will end up burnt out, and I wouldn't do that again in my third year. But I really enjoyed organising the Mayball and being there. During the night was really, really stressful, but once everyone left and it all cleared out, but all the decorations were still up, I remember going back to the orchard where it was held. What kind of time are we on?
No, we're good.
Yeah?
We're good.
I remember going back to the orchard and just starting to bawl my eyes out and cry. For an hour straight, I was just walking around the orchard in disbelief that, oh my God, this is my time at Cambridge over. Mayball done and university done, and in a way you kind of think that you would peak there, but I'm starting to think less and less about peaking and just making sure that that I'm consistent with how I do things, and I think the Mayball experience was really, really nice. But again, for anyone thinking about doing a Mayball, don't do it in your third year. Do it in your second year, and focus on career and academics in your third year, and focus on friends as well. I would say make the most of Cambridge. I want to emphasize the importance of moving out of your comfort zone, and I think you do this really, really, really well. I'm not even sure what your comfort zone is anymore. I've seen you in so many different contexts, and I think your comfort zone is just literally being outside of your comfort zone in a very counterintuitive way. But yeah, it's just that moving out of your comfort zone and doing things that you didn't really think you could do before, because Cambridge gives you a lot of opportunities. You just have to put the work in and put the effort in. And I want to give one last shout out to the Cambridge University Digital Gaming Society, because I spent a lot of time in my second year, because there wasn't too much else to do, playing video games with them, and I made some of my really, really close friends from Cambridge on CUDGS playing the same game, and to this day I treasure those friendships and those memories of so-called 10-mans, these kind of 5v5 in-house matches, and to this day we still play some of them, but obviously with a lot less frequently than we did back in 2021. I think I'm very, very happy that I joined that server and that I became friends with those people, because I really do love everyone on that server, even Jamal from Warwick.
So you're still staying in Cambridge, in Cambridge. Is that just because the opportunity happened to be in Cambridge, or are you trying to maybe have an extra year of the Cambridge kind of friendships and the bubble and the opportunities?
Yeah, both. Yeah,
Bit of
you really touched on the second part. I really wanted to have one more year of the Cambridge experience without the pressure of my degree. I love my degree, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to, I could still go to the same events. I'm still part of many of the same societies, and most of my friends are still here, if not in London. So for me, spending time with them and staying here. Cambridge is a lovely city to live in, even if you're not at university. So for me, staying here was when the opportunity was presented, and the decision was between a firm in London or a company here in Cambridge. I picked Cambridge because I really prefer to live here. I love how close it is to nature. I love everything about this city, maybe except for the one-way cycling roads and people disrespecting them. I have some qualms with Cambridge, but for the most part, it's a wonderful city to live in. And yeah, I feel really, really grateful that I had the opportunity to stay here.
Got a couple final questions, but before that, anything else you want to be included?
No, I think I touched on most things. I'm just really mesmerized by the view you have outside your window. This is incredible.
Where's your camera?
I wish I'd brought it.
I guess second to last is, like, if you one day have an autobiography or biography and and the cover is a photo of you, what would that photo look like? Like, where would it be? What pose would you be in? What would you be wearing? What facial expression? What would be the one photo that would that you hope to capture your life?
This is a difficult question because I'm very, very critical when it comes to photos of myself. It's and I still am sometimes having trouble with self-image, and so it would be difficult to choose. I think I have this image in my mind where I'm kind of on the back of like a pickup truck somewhere in Latin America with a camera in my hand and and a backpack and like a notebook in my other hand, just kind of smiling and going into a rainforest or something. But that's difficult. That's difficult to say. Speaking of autobiography, I did kind of start to write one when I was 18, and so that already somewhat exists. Very egotistically, I must say, but I wanted to just write, and yeah, that helped. If I had known that question was coming, I would have thought about it a bit more, but off the top of my head, I think that's my that's
before my last question, just want to give you another opportunity to kind of share any shout outs. I know you've already acknowledged many people, but are there any other really important people like Mum or like others who you might want to say a special word, and you can send this episode to them perhaps?
Yeah, I obviously love my parents, and I tell it to them very often, but all my friends at Cambridge, people like Jenny and Phoebe, who will know who they are, and Phil and Jude from Homerton, and Zephyr, of course, and so many. I mean, I feel like I know of a lot of people, but knowing people more in depth is a very, it's a privilege, and I actually really I envy this podcast and your podcast to some extent, because I think it's a really, really wonderful idea to not only give people the opportunity to kind of encapsulate themselves at a certain age, but also to make new connections and to expose the people of Cambridge to the world. I think that's an incredible opportunity, and it's such a great idea. So I want to give you a shout out, David. I think you do a wonderful job in Cambridge, and I still don't understand how you're such a social butterfly, but you do. You're incredible, and I think you genuinely make Cambridge a better place. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I think I remember when I asked you for my about SOC 1 in your exams, and one of my mates said, "Oh, I wish I could do as well as you," and then your response was like, "Well, don't sell yourself short. Like, you can do it." And I think that kind of positive thinking and encouragement really helped me at the time. And it often, when you finish the exam and you get your results, you go, "Oh, it wasn't too bad." But then in the moment leading up to the exam, the kind of stress, and I don't want to underestimate that at all. And I think that adds to my last question, in the sense that the bullying that you went through and other kids go through is horrific. It's really, detrimental to your well-being at the time, and, casts doubts on all sorts of stuff. But unfortunately, bullying is a very prevalent thing, and it's one of the unique, educational and human challenges that permeates all sorts of social environments. So for you now, having finished your university degree, having had the chance to write, to capture photographs, to do all the things that you have talked about, what is like a message that you would share either to you in primary school or other kids in Hungary and elsewhere who are feeling out of place, who are feeling out of their comfort zone, who feel like the world may not tolerate them, may not belong, basically all the feelings that you had, which I know that you still feel? What would you tell them now with the lived experiences that you've had since?
I would say to anyone, or even myself, if you have parts or aspects of your life that you're not happy with, and it's things that are in your control, then make the changes and don't wait with them for too long, because I think once you make those changes, you inevitably become a better person. I think everyone has kind of this idealized version of themselves within, of like, oh, I want to become this and this by age, this and this age. And once you make those changes, you'll instantaneously become a lot happier. And for those who are feeling anxiety, I just want to say there's this one quote that helped me a lot in kind of late 2021, which was, you are exactly where you need to be, and there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to make sure that you're going in the right way. And there's a lot of the cliches are cliches for a reason. And if you feel like you need help with overcoming some of your troubles, then don't feel like it's inappropriate to ever reach out to other people, and particularly professionals, to get some help and support with any of the issues that you might be experiencing. I think for me, a life-changing moment was reaching out to my school psychologist, and she was very, very helpful. I saw her for about a year and a half, and she was really, 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 really helpful. And I don't think mental health should be stigmatized. Speak to the people who love you and the people you trust, and remember that even if you feel cornered in life, there's a way out, and there's always a way out. And I encourage people who might be bullied or might be in a difficult position in life themselves to seek help, and to make sure that their basic habits in life are the ones that they actually want. For example, if you want to smoke certain substances and eat junk food for days and days and days on end, look yourself in the mirror and say that you actually want to do that. And if you don't wince and realize that's a bad habit to maintain, I'll be a little bit surprised. But if you do wince and you do realize that that's a bad thing to do, then don't be afraid to make those changes, because the world is out there waiting for you, and it's all yours to take. And these cliches are cliches for a reason. And I truly believe that people can make changes that will ultimately improve their lives. As for dealing with bullies, speak to people who are in a more powerful position than you to help resolve that issue. And there's always help out there.
Thank you very much, Levi. And the light could be sunshine in Australia.
David, this was incredible. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Been a pleasure. Thanks.